Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for our weekly call for community solutions hosted by Forbes Funds and GPNP. For those of you who haven't joined us before, our team has hosted these community calls weekly since March of 2020 to provide nonprofits with critical resources and updates, a shared space to discuss challenges, a snapshot of relevant policies, and timely insight from subject matter experts. Since that time, the Forbes Funds and GPNP have hosted 5,650 meetings with the participation of over 48,280 dedicated community members. We do all of this utilizing a dual framework that draws on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the social determinants of health to align cross-sector and guide the outcomes of our work. Additionally, the 8 returns model guides how we measure the success or returns on various forms of our investment. For today's call, we encourage you to go ahead and use the chat function to share your name and organization out with the group, as well as any comments or questions you might have during today's call. We also strongly encourage you to join us on screen to maximize engagement. We'll reserve time for a Q&A after our speaker presentation today, followed by Forbes Funds GPMP ecosystem updates and a public policy recap from our GPMP director, Emily Francis. As a friendly reminder, there will be a poll at the end of the call. Please be sure to complete that survey so we can keep our content and resources relevant to you all. So today we have Coop Cooper coming from Community Forge. He is going to talk with us today about Community Forge, which is a thriving community hub in the neighborhood of Wilkinsburg in the East End. He's going to talk a little bit about Community Forge's inception, their dynamic programming and resource offerings, and also talk a little bit more about the upcoming upgrades that they have, a theater and cafe space, creating a new cultural destination in Pittsburgh's East End. So we are very excited to hear from Coop today. Coop is a Pittsburgh native and co-founder. Oh, let me switch the screen so you can see here. Pittsburgh native and co-founder of Community Forge, a thriving community center hoping to be a model of equitable economic development. Coop holds a PhD in theoretical physics and worked as a professor in higher ed in engineering, mathematics, and physics before founding Community Forge in 2017. He now heads the delivery and excellence of Community Forge's programs and leads the capital improvement of the space. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Coop to get us started. Thanks so much, Coop.
All right. Thanks, guys. Hi, everybody. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, like you mentioned, Patrick Cooper, but most people call me Coop, and I encourage you to do so as well. I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, just kind of a lightweight slideshow here just to have some pictures to kind of accommodate the stuff that we're talking about. So this is Community Forge, basically around the day that we purchased it. Community Forge is a lot. It's kind of hard to describe, but yeah, I think a community center in the East End, a resource hub in the East End, community economic vitalization project in Wilkinsburg are all pretty apt descriptions. I kind of framed this discussion as a sort of past, present, future, sort of where we came from, where we're at now, and where we're hoping to be in the future. In the spirit of a call for community solutions, would also like to kind of frame this as sort of like, what is the problem and what is this a solution of? So yeah, me and my friends have started this for a bunch of ragtag team of lefties, idealists, utopians. And we were all sort of from and around the Pittsburgh region, whether it be the city of Pittsburgh. I'm from the burbs personally. Our other co-founders from the Mon Valley. So we kind of had an idea of Pittsburgh's past, Pittsburgh's deindustrialization, some of the challenges it faces, but also a lot of the opportunities and spirit of the region as well. We all kind of got into more esoteric stuff. As you saw from my bio, I got into theoretical physics, or one of our other co-founders is a CMU computer science guy. Another co-founder is a philosopher at Berkeley. And so we definitely were into some of this more abstract academic stuff, but our heart really always lied on the ground and the real lived experiences, the people in our community. And we wanted to make sure that we were actualizing our sort of politics in a real and effective way, not just in these sort of coffee shop conversations in Greenwich Village or whatever. So yeah, our first project actually was to build an off-grid sort of like left this conference space commune in rural Tennessee, where we like built a barn and put solar panels on it. And, you know, it was pretty successful. We had running water, we had electricity, internet, composting toilet, and we had lots of interesting gatherings there. It was right along the 2017 Great American Eclipse Path. And so we had a pretty dope solar eclipse party there. But we sort of slowly realized after being there and having conversations that we were never really going to have an impact in this area that we weren't from, that we didn't really fully understand. And that was so far away from an urban environment, far away from people, from resources, from our own ability to leverage our social capital to activate the space. So we decided to do something back where we're all from in Pittsburgh. We found this old school on, I think it was either Redfin or Zillow or something like that. And decided that this was it, that this is perfect. The kind of philosophy, the problem, of course, is that, you know, cities sort of wane and wax over time. They grow and contract. And whenever you have moments of contraction, whether it be from crack epidemic, or whether it be from deindustrialization, losing jobs, Westinghouse going away, like whatever it is, what follows is just sort of this period of economic stagnation. It follows a lot of people like leaving, a lot of jobs leaving, a lot of economic activity leaving. And a school shutting down is kind of like a perfect symbol of that happening, where there is this like huge government institution that is sort of outside of the economy. It's actually more the spirit of the neighborhood that brings people together, brings parents together, brings kids together. It acts as all sorts of extracurricular centers of activity. And the question was, could private citizens sort of re-inject life back into a public asset like a school? Could we kind of reclaim its place as the center of community life and a center of community hope as well? And that was sort of the idea. I mean, I was living in Brooklyn for a long time, and so I experienced just the insane rapid effects of gentrification. And so, yeah, the question was, can we do this? And is it possible to do this in an equitable way, in a way that is inclusive of the people of Wilkinsburg, not just economic development by bringing in outside money and having it displace the people there, but actually building the people there slowly, so that way they're creating their own economic opportunities. So yeah, we didn't really know what we were doing, but we all moved back to Pittsburgh and took out a giant loan from Bridgeway Capital, and purchased Johnson Elementary School. So yeah, Wilkinsburg was a really thriving community for a long time. It still has lots of pockets of really awesome stuff going on. So that never really left, but it definitely declined in scale. I mean, Wilkinsburg had well over 30,000 people back in the 1950s. And today it's much less than half of that, maybe like 10,000 people, something like that. And also another thing to point out about Wilkinsburg's demographic transition is it wasn't like, okay, the steel mills left, Westinghouse declined, and then all of a sudden the population fled. The biggest decrease in census year of Wilkinsburg population actually happened between 2000 and 2010. That was like a 17% decline in Wilkinsburg's population. And then the decline from 2010 to 2020, so this is well after the law gang was out on the streets, well after the crack epidemic, well after, you know, deindustrialization and all that. 2010 to 2020 had the same order of magnitude of decline in population as the 1970s, as the 1980s. And so this is something that could kind of happen to any community. It can happen for a variety of reasons. I have a lot of theories as well. But yeah, so it's something that we really have been wanting to kind of transition. But nonetheless, their high school, the year that we bought the building, they closed down their high school, started shipping their kids to Pittsburgh Public School. The Hosanna House is a similar project that purchased another elementary school in Wilkinsburg a long time ago, the Horner School, and now Johnston Elementary School was also for sale. What Wilkinsburg School District is left with now are two schools, Turner and Kelly at the moment. But so Johnston was moving. Sort of a random side note, you know, all of us that went to buy the building, it was a very big project and we didn't have a lot of business acumen. We were sort of like academics and stuff. We had a vision for how it would revitalize the community, but we didn't really know how to sort of like get business loans and, you know, get construction loans and activate the space and deal with taxes and payroll and everything. Because at first we started as an LLC. We weren't even a nonprofit. We were just a business because we couldn't secure funding for the building unless we had our personal assets and liability on the line. We each had to come up with 10K to put down, and then we each had to put our credit on the line to get this loan. So we were an LLC to begin with. The whole project seemed maybe a little too big for a first project for us, and we were about ready to walk away. But simultaneously, this other group that's also from Pittsburgh, a spinoff of CMU called X Pogo, which was an extreme pogo stick company, they were looking to move their bases of operations back from New York to Pittsburgh. And they were looking at the building because we have a 60-foot atrium. All the classrooms have 14-foot ceilings. There's a huge parking lot on the grounds. And they wanted to host their flagship Pogo Palooza event there, and actually hold their company there. They were about to walk away because they didn't need 26 classrooms. They just needed a couple spaces. And it was actually the real estate agent that was like, you know what, you're kind of wanting to bring Pogo back to the community sort of vibe, and you're sort of like radical. You want to live upstairs and have a co-living situation and then have a little community center at the bottom vibe. Somehow those could mix. We're not really sure. And they sat us down at 61B Cafe on South Braddock, and the ex-Pogo founders and us had a conversation, and it made sense. And so we started Community Forge together. And so the original Community Forge LLC was a sort of like us and ex-Pogo mashup project. In the top left, you could see the original logo of Community Forge. And yeah, it was the building was in decent shape, all things considered. The bones of the building were very good, but the interior of the building was kind of a disaster. The only thing they were using the building for, more or less, was a polling location in the basement, and then also to train police dogs. So if you went into any of the closets in the classrooms early on, you'd find bags of fake drugs and fake money that they were training the dogs to try and find. And yeah, for the first 3 years, we just completely renovated this space with about $200,000 to renovate the whole 40,000 square foot space, and just hundreds and hundreds of hours of volunteer work. Nobody was paid. For the first 3 years, there was one local person that we hired as sort of a property manager, janitor, to keep the space clean for all the tenants. But besides that, it was very volunteer run. On the one hand, that's cool, inspirational, great, but on the other hand, very unsustainable. And so like this model was only going to last as long as a bunch of 20-somethings energy could last. But luckily in 2020, after having 3 years of running in the black, the business in the black in terms of all the rentals, we had about 26 leases, multi-year leases on the books. We had activated it with over 100 events a year. We got occupancy on the first 2 floors. So that was enough to kind of convince Bridgeway Capital, yeah, we kind of know what we're doing enough that we could refinance as a nonprofit and actually like get some funding. Heinz Endowment, people wanted to fund us, but they just didn't have a mechanism for doing so, because at the end of the day, we could just cash out on everything and just take the money and leave. And so we became a 501c3. That 501c3 was called Locally Grown, and Community Forge is like a locally grown project. But that really elevated what we were able to do in the building. That's just Jackie smashing the walls. So we became a nonprofit, and since 2020, we now have about 30-ish full-time employees with another set of about 10 part-time employees. So we have almost 40 people working for us. So we went from 1 to 40 in just a couple of years, which has its own pains, as many people here that work for nonprofits know. So we activated the space. As a nonprofit, it's not just our tenants that are sort of doing all the good work that we wanted to be able to do, but we actually can host some of these programs ourselves. So I kind of see Community Forge as having 4 main pillars. One of them is the building itself, and that's what we're seeing here is just a couple photos of events. We host a really awesome open mic. Shout out if anyone is looking for something really free and fun to do every 3rd Friday of the month. The African American Music Institute sends their best jazz musicians to come play backup behind whatever's going on stage. So if someone comes up there and they're playing some kind of like Native American flute, or someone's doing some hip hop, or someone's reading a children's book, then AAMI is just like playing jazz behind it, and it's amazing. And it's beautiful. And Bricolage production company has their sound studio open at the same time, and you can play with their sound effects studio. It's a good time. We have like our sort of flagship open mic event once a month, but also people just rent our space for events. Tenants rent our space for events. Our programs all host events. So we really try and activate the space and bring it to life. On top of the events and the programming we do through our tenants, we also run our own programs. So one of the programs is a youth empowerment program called Boot Up. In the top right, you can see like a flyer for some of the stuff that Boot Up offers. Boot Up is really like a technology empowerment program. It's not just like a STEM program. It's really about, how can you find technology to activate your dreams and your goals and your identity and your sense of self and your sense of accomplishment and family and community. It's very much about sort of like growing self-confidence and growing a cultural identity and using technology as sort of a framework for doing that. So we sort of teach digital literacy and STEM through this more sort of emotional objective of technology empowerment. Allegheny County chose us to be the quarterback site for Wilkinsburg, Homewood, East Hills, and Penn Hills for their CURE program, which is a violence reduction program. Super awesome program if you guys haven't heard about it before. It's this philosophy of treating violence like a disease and using the same sort of epidemiology perspective when trying to combat community violence. So that means identifying that a community has been infected, identifying that point of infection, quarantining the folks in that infection that have experienced that infection. So stopping the spread, thinking about the R value of violence and how it spreads. So it's, yeah, and also inoculating the population beforehand by having all sorts of positive community norm changing events and experiences. So it's a super effective evidence-driven program that came out of the South Side of Chicago, actually. And we deploy that in our program, and that's like half of our staff. Half of our staff are outreach workers and violence interrupters that are from the streets, that have lived that life and don't want to live that anymore, want to make change in their community. Or maybe they're like OGs from the community that people really respect, or the football coach or what have you. Many of them like still live in the projects that they're operating out of. Yeah, and they intervene, they mediate, they stop the spread. So can't say enough good things about our CURE team. They're doing some really intense, stressful, but impactful and powerful work. And the CURE teams all over the region are also just really some of the most amazing people I've ever met. So if you ever hear an opportunity to hear from some of these CURE folks, I really highly recommend it. And then we also have what's called an economic mobility department, which is really just sort of like a name to describe this huge like wraparound services type program. We have a pantry where there's food and clothes and diapers. We have a workforce development program in mechatronics where we're taking people and training them to learn about the burgeoning robotics industry here in Pittsburgh and trying to get them upskilled and into apprenticeships and learning some professional development on top of the engineering aspects of mechatronics. Yeah, they just do a lot of really, really amazing work. We inherited an entire other nonprofit called Locally Served, which was a legal nonprofit, which was helping people kind of get their kids back, helping people stay out of prison. And so we still have a lot of that ethos as well. This was sort of out of Kate Lovelace, who's a magistrate now. It was sort of her idea, which was that there are so many people that like basically stand at a fork where if they just stray a little bit to the right, they have this like court date, it came in the mail, they need to go to it, but they like missed the last bus and they don't have enough money for an Uber to make that court date, that starts them down a path that just is completely devastating for them, for their family, and quite frankly, for all of us too. I mean, it's incredibly expensive to have to, deal with incarceration and all these like different ramifications of getting involved in the criminal justice system. But if they just had $15 to get into an Uber, then their entire life goes in a completely different direction. And so there are all these like points that you can just inject $20 and like save a life, save a family, save the state hundreds of thousands of dollars over 10 years. And so identifying those points of contact and making those like interjections and actually sticking with those people and keeping them away from that intersection point, that's some of the like deep holistic work that the economic mobility department does, which we're very happy about. So that's kind of like what's going on in the present. That's like our most recent logo up in the corner. In the future, so just to kind of speak of some of the stuff that Christine mentioned, I asked ChatGPT, I was like, can you take our old logo and make some sort of futuristic version of what like Community Forge's logo might be like 100 years from now? And this is what ChatGPT came up with. I don't know, I'm not a huge fan, but like it's growing on me the more I see it. So we've activated the sort of like main atrium and the upper floors of Community Forge. But the basement, the ground floor has never been activated. And also there was a promise to the Wilkinsburg community that we also haven't activated yet either. When we first took over the building, we had a huge barbecue with tons of butcher paper up on the walls for people to write down what they want to see in Community Forge. And there were some people who wanted these nonprofit programs, whatever, like definitely after school programs, stuff like that. And we made good on those promises. But one of the things that was actually the most popular thing that Wilkinsburg as a community came in and said, and by the way, part of the community solution that is really a big part of our ethos at Community Forge is like, even though we're very theoretical people, like we did not come in with like a 5-point plan for how to like fix Wilkinsburg. None of us are actually from the borough of Wilkinsburg. That would have been hella inappropriate. But what we did is we came in with this philosophy, this very data-driven philosophy of like, we're going to go in and we're literally just going to listen to everything that people are telling us and then use whatever sort of social capital and skills we have to execute on all these things that the people are telling us. And one of the big things they were telling us was like, we want to live here. Like we want to get food, all this stuff. Like, well, we make it work. But the thing that really like transforms our lives, is whether or not like we're feeling fulfilled and that our spirit is happy and healthy here. And so like we want a place to eat, we want a place to dance, we want a place to get together, to sing, we want a place to see art, we want a place to just kick it on a Friday night. And that's kind of more like entertainment businessy, and that really wasn't part of our sort of like nonprofit journey. But luckily we got a huge gift from the Hillman family to actually like activate our basement into exactly that. So in the bottom right, you see a music room that's getting turned into a cafe. And the top right is a library that's getting turned into a 120-seat black box theater. And the top left is like kind of the old entryway that's going to turn into an art lobby. The bottom left is the old gym, and that's getting turned into a community space. And so we're super stoked about those developments. You can kind of see some just like digital architectural markups now. It's basically the whole front half of the building. When you first enter, you kind of like go down the stairs, and to the left there's the theater, and to the right you have the community space and the cafe. The community space. Sorry, is there a question?
No, I'm listening.
Oh, okay. Hi, Sam. Nice to see you. So yeah, the community space, the gym, we're going to transform into just a rental for people to do stuff in. I mean, our first year, we just had so many requests from the neighbors to be like, I'm having a baby shower, I'm having a birthday party, I want to have a surprise event for my cousin or whatever. And as we sort of grow and the building gets nicer, the sustainable price point for that kind of event gets harder and harder and harder. Like back whenever we were just filling this 40,000 square foot space with whatever anybody wanted to do that was kind of on mission, we were able to do things for like 10, 15 bucks here and there and just pile them all together. But as the space shrinks because we're filling it with other programs, and as it kind of gets nicer and more expensive and we have staff and overhead, it's been hard to kind of keep our prices down for the folks in the community to just do sort of like a spades tournament with their buddies. And so we really want to keep the gym as like a nice rentable community space that people can just like use the same way they used Community Forge back in 2017 whenever we started. But it'll be nice, luckily. So that's pretty cool too. So the gym's going to be activated into that. The library, originally when the building was built, there was a boys gym and a girls gym. And then in the 50s, the girls gym became the library, and then you just had a gym. And now the library is going to be opened back up again to be the same footprint as the gym, but it's going to be turned into a theater. The seats will be removable, so that way it could kind of be like a place for dance parties or a place for community gatherings or a gala, or it could be a traditional theater or an immersive theater. It has like some stairs that go down to from the parking lot, so there's a sort of like speakeasy vibe to it as well. So we're really hoping this would be great. Our founder wrote a play that was performed in the South Side. Bricolage Production Company are some of our best friends, and they have their headquarters in the building. We're partnered with Boom Concepts, so there's a lot of like theater and art folks that are all a part of bringing this vision alive. This isn't what the cafe is going to look like after a few rounds of doing the architectural work, but the music room is going to have a cafe. The degree to which it's a full commercial kitchen kind of depends on tariffs, unfortunately, going to depend on our budget. But we do have the intention of actually being able to serve like good food and coffee and to support the theater as well. Even the spaces in between the spaces are like hallway in between the community space and the theater. We want to trick out to be this kind of interesting, cool hallway with some architectural elements. The lobby, when you first walk in, is going to have some community art that you can purchase to kind of support local artists. So yeah, it should be great. This has been my life for the last year. It's been a really awesome journey, like learning journey for me too, just like understanding sort of all the mechanical systems that come about for a commercial space. And so if any of you on the call out there are sort of like interested in developing a commercial space for the sake of community use and are looking for ways to like do it scrappily on a budget, feel free to reach out to me. My email is just coop@forge.community. I love talking to people how to activate old spaces, and in Pittsburgh there's a ton of them. So feel free to use me as a consultant anytime you want. I love chatting about it. So yeah, we're really excited about this. We're hoping that this launches. We were hoping it would launch this year. The pricing environment makes it look like we're going to have to do this in phases, and so maybe like kind of early 2026. But we do have general contractors we're in conversation with. So fingers crossed, you'll be able to see some really awesome immersive theater program at Community Forge, and maybe in the first half of next year. That was a little long and rambly and without questions, and so thank you for sticking with me, and happy to chat, as much as people would like. Thank you.
Thank you, Coop. Not rambly at all. That's all amazing work. And I know that I expressed this when we met a couple weeks ago, but I'm from Wilkinsburg and it's so interesting. It's just, I really appreciate what you all have done to make sure that you capture the spirit of Wilkinsburg and what its residents want and hope for, and really showing respect for the history. Um, I really, I, you did touch on this, but I would love to reiterate because something that really stands out from our discussions is that process that you all had, knowing, that you weren't nonprofit experts, that you weren't Wilkinsburg residents. How did you, what were your first steps when you had this idea in going and saying, okay, how do we do this right? How do we respect the history, respect the residents? And also, sort of a two-parter to that, how are you continuing to do so? As I know you're talking about a lot of adjustments, meeting a lot of different people's needs. And how are you kind of holding yourselves accountable and keeping that true sense and true identity of Wilkinsburg there?
Yeah, so at the beginning, there was a solid 6 months before, we got the keys in July of 2017, and we sort of started the process in late 2016, kind of January 2017. So there was a solid 6 month period where like we were going to church groups and we were just like asking if we can get in front of whenever they have like public meetings and stuff like that, that we could just talk to people and be like, hey, we're not really from here. The Johnson School, they're thinking about turning it into a guardian storage facility. And that sounds like not exciting. That sounds like just like a bunch of people from Squirrel Hill storing their stuff in your neighborhood. We would like to activate it and do something that's like a little bit more exciting and empowering for the people that live here. But like, what is it that like you guys would want to see here? Like what, a lot of you are nostalgic about Wilkinsburg from like the 50s and 60s. Like, what did you like about Wilkinsburg back then? Like, so we definitely talked to like church groups, which are some of the more like hop-in community organizations. We were really tight with the borough council and talked to a lot of council people, and went to council meetings. We went to the school board meetings and we got to know school board members personally, just to kind of understand like, okay, this is like your guys' building. You have put your tax money into this thing for 100 years to kind of like get it where it's at today. And then like a bunch of people are just going to buy it for like 200 grand or something like, and so we recognize how kind of like messed up in a sense that is like they put millions of dollars in this building and then like a bunch of random people are going to buy it for like 200K. So like we want to acknowledge that like the economics of that like kind of sucks, and so like please help us make sure that like we do right by you and your investment and your community's investment and this historic building. It's an Alden and Harlow building who did the Carnegie Museum. So like every time we bring an architect in there, they're just like, oh my god, I didn't even know there was an Alden and Harlow here in Wilkinsburg. And so so we really appreciate, we try to like be very careful about that. And like we came from these sort of like lefty spaces in like Brooklyn and Denver and stuff like that, where like gentrification was like the topic that everybody that like, kind of my age, like middle millennial people were talking about. And so we were like hyper nervous about messing it up. And so we kind of took a lot of precautions. Nowadays, luckily, like a huge percentage of our staff are people who like grew up and are from Wilkinsburg. And so we actually now, I, there's, yeah, I think like two white guys on our staff. Like I'm very not representative of what our staff looks like. Even like geographically, like most of our staff are from East Hills, Penn Hills, Wilkinsburg. The whole care team are from around here. So yeah, so there's a lot of internal voices now that can kind of help guide that conversation. The economic mobility department is in contact with just like tons and tons of people from all over Wilkinsburg and the region. And they also did a community resource survey, and we door knocked and just pulled people with flyers, and gave some rewards for people that would fill out surveys for us. And it was just a Wilkinsburg poll of like, hey, fill this out and we'll give you something. And it was like, what do you need? What do you want? Like, what are some barriers? What are some organizations that are doing good by you? And what are some organizations that are not doing good by you? And so we still do a bit of that fact finding mission. And yeah, we just try and get involved in everything. I'm running for school board as well, so I'll be I'm running unopposed, luckily, and so like hopefully I'll be, you know, fingers crossed, I'll be on the actual school board in December and can actually like be on the other side of that curtain, like because I bought a house here in Wilkinsburg. I live right down the street from Community Forge. That was another thing too. Before buying the building, I rented an apartment across the street from the building and just like lived in that apartment and just sort of like got to know all the neighbors and people that like are immediately next to Community Forge, because they were going to be the ones that were the most impacted by it, and also all their kids like went to Johnson and stuff like that. And recently, I bought a house down the street, also on Franklin Avenue. So now that I'm a community member, I'm, you know, running for the school board, and we're currently looking into selling the high school now, and so now I'll be sort of on the other side of that, like being the person selling a school, and hopefully can bring some insight into like what's possible and like what we should say no to and what we should potentially say yes to as well. So yeah, just kind of keep your ear to the ground and like don't get too caught up in your own sort of like theory and narratives, and just be like super aware of the fact that like you probably don't know what's best for other people. 99% of the time other people know what they need, and so yeah, just always being willing to pivot and change and come up with an idea and scrap that idea if it's not going well and it's not serving people. That comes with a lot of headache. It's a lot easier to just get good at a thing and sit back and keep doing that thing forever, but so long as, you know, the founders and the people here still have energy left in them to continue like innovating and iterating, we're going to keep doing so.
I love that. Wonderful.
I got a
I s-
question.
oh, go ahead.
My question is to Coop. What type of service you provide to Cure far as outreach workers? And my second question is, do you have any contact and doing the same thing with the Cure outreach workers in Mon Valley?
Okay, yeah, two good questions. So Cure's main like target population are at-risk individuals for being sort of victims or committing violent crimes. And so the outreach workers are basically like wraparound social workers that connect people to whatever services they might need. A lot of times violent crimes happen because of things like underemployment, food scarcity, rent issues. Like a lot of crimes can be avoided if people just kind of stabilize the resource environment around them. And so that's what the outreach workers are trying to do, is they're trying to find people who are kind of desperate or they're in a bad living situation or whatever, and they're trying to like get them all the resources they need to sort of get out of that. Our economic mobility department is trying to do that only for everybody. And so like one of our employees, and it was one of our first hires at Community Forge, is Bethany Hallam, who is a county councilwoman. And she has just been absolutely incredible at like, because she has all these like, you know, DHS people that she can just like call on her personal cell phone and everything. So she has been like really, really instrumental at like getting people housing, getting people furniture, mobilize, like getting them back on whatever social services that they lost because of some random bureaucratic thing. And so to kind of answer your question, like anything that might like help somebody that interacts with like state and government systems, yeah, legal services, educational services, you name it. We really believe that like if you're not just sort of like treating this whole thing head on holistically, then yeah, people are going to get lost in the sauce. And I understand it's good to specialize. It's good to kind of have your niche little thing and to kind of work in an ecosystem of other programs. And we absolutely make referrals and stuff like that too. But we really try and make sure that this place is a one-stop shop in some sense, that like no matter what the issue is, if you just come in and you say, I have this issue, who do I talk to? The person at the front desk is going to be like second floor, like third room on the right. And so,
Okay.
yeah. And then your follow-up question was about the Mon Valley. We are
Yes.
super interested in the Mon Valley. That's another thing we learned, is that the ecosystem for Pittsburgh is huge. There's tons of people that are serving people in Pittsburgh. But the Mon Valley, and that's where our executive director and other co-founder, Michael Skirpin, he is from Belle Vernon. His family lives in Menneson and Denora.
Okay.
And so, yeah, we are really interested. We're out in the Keysport doing programming out in Jeanette. We just recently landed a sponsorship from CNX, and what they want is they really want us to serve the zip codes that are the most affected by CNX's footprint. And so we're very excited to try and leverage that partnership into meeting all of the other organizations that are doing good work out there, and sort of filling that gap. CNX has this sort of hoods and woods sort of perspective where they're like, look, if you look at like the statistics of Homewood and you look at the statistics of like a rural community in Westmoreland County, like they would look exactly the same. There's the same amount of like drug use, poverty, crime, any of these things that you might associate with an area that's experiencing like low SES like outcomes and things. Like it's exactly the same as some of these other regions, but yet there's nowhere near as many people that are like thinking about those areas and thinking about what economic development looks like there, what social services look like there. And it's challenging. The density isn't as high, so you don't get as much sort of like bang for your buck in terms of how many people you can serve at once. There's other logistical challenges about just physical space, things being more spread out, not a lot of other wraparound services. So yes, we're super interested in all that. That's a passion project of our executive director. And just like being from Appalachia and the Rust Belt and the Pittsburgh region, I think that is like potentially what could be one of the more like healing things in our politics is just acknowledging the fact that these folks have some issues too and are struggling, and that like they should be, you know, thought about and served just as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then we had a question from Hannah in the chat about whether you could discuss a little bit more about any capacity building you did with Forbes funds during these early stages.
Capacity building with Forbes Fund. That's a good question. I know that Deb, who's on this call, definitely has given us tons of consulting, which is super awesome. And Forbes Fund, I know very early on adopted our executive director as a sort of like mentee. I know like, because again, like we didn't have experience in any of this before starting Community Forge, starting this organization. And so it was very valuable actually that Forbes Fund had somebody, I forget the guy's name who Mike was working with, our executive director, but basically would just like meet up with him every month and help him with mentorship. And just, yeah, you guys have always been in the mix for just like that, like knowledge that you really can't get by just like, you know, asking Claude or ChatGPT or something, like some like real lived experience in the nonprofit community here in Pittsburgh. And yeah, whenever you are like a utopian and an idealist, it gives you like an infinite amount of energy to like sand floors at like 11 o'clock at night, which you might need to like bring an old building back online. But it doesn't prepare you well for making really hard, practical, realistic decisions. We've had to fire a lot of people, and that sucks and that hurts. And we really mix our mission with our employment in a way that like makes that really hard. Like we try and hire people, give people opportunities that maybe wouldn't get opportunities in other places. And like if you come to us for a job and you like went to Johnson Elementary School, it is very hard for us to like stay focused and be like, are you the right person for the job? Or just kind of like, yeah, we really want you to like be a part of our organization and blah, blah, blah. And then whenever it doesn't work out, then like that's like horrible and it's the absolute worst part of our job. And so like I think like Forbes Fund has done a good job at just sort of allowing us to grow through that and understand the reality of that situation and understand that like what matters is being laser focused on our mission, and that sometimes the best way to serve the mission is to make some hard decisions in terms of programs and personnel. And so yeah, in terms of like direct support from grants and stuff, that could be true. I actually don't know if we had received like cash from the Forbes Fund specifically. But I do know that like Fred's whole family works at Community Forge. Sekou is one of our front desk people. Xavier is like a nephew who like works with our boot up program. And so we're friends of the family, you know, Forbes Fund.
Nice. No, that was perfect. I mean, I think that's a really important thing to highlight here is again, beyond dollars, how can we continue to work with each other and lean into each other's strengths and expertise and capacity building, is one of those. So I'm glad to hear that that was helpful. We do have a question from Jacob. Go ahead, Jacob.
Hi, thank you. Coop, I'm wondering what it looks like when you approach community partners for the first time. We do something really similar to you, but we're in a much earlier stage at Pitt's Greater Hazelwood Neighborhood Commitment. And like, it seems like you have a really sort of authentic and on the ground beat on what the community needs are. But how do you kind of negotiate that with the resources you do have versus what the community is sort of telling you what it needs? And what do you do when those don't always line up?
Yeah, that's a hard question that because it doesn't line up sometimes. And, yeah, I mean, I think like the one thing that we do when we try and approach a community member or something is we always try and like bring something to the table. Like we always try and like, I don't know, just this is probably something that like humanity has known for thousands of years that when you show up, you like bring a gift or whatever to, and it's just like kind of like showing up and being like, we're not just like here because like we need your partnership in order to like make our program authentic or something like that, or to just have like a non-extractive sort of like outlook, and also to like build a relationship kind of before getting into some sort of more formal partnership. That's another thing, like especially with our boot up program, lots of like universities and educational institutions and stuff kind of want to be like, we'll come and like teach your kids this or blah blah blah. And it's like, no, we have open hours on Friday from 4 to 7:30. Come hang out. And like after like a month of like you hanging out in our space, if we see that you're building authentic relationships with the people there, then let's talk about maybe like you have this program that you want to run or something like that. But just being okay with sort of like gatekeeping your community a little bit from all these other like, because that's a lesson we learned early on. Early on, Pitt would be like, we want to do an experiment on your kids with this new like learning software, and be like, cool, Pitt in our building or CMU in our building, they want to bring robots and the kids get to use robots, cool. But then what we realized is that like that did more harm than good. Like, yeah, those kids got to play with some CMU robots for one time, but the fact that they just came in, did a thing, extracted some data from the youth, and then just bounced emotionally, what that did to the youth seeing that, it just reaffirmed this part of their identity where they're like, oh, CMU is not for me. Like they're outsiders that are coming in and treating me as an outsider. And so just being cognizant of that and being willing to just say no to certain like partnerships that aren't like authentic community. Your question was maybe more about like the people in the community, not so much the outsiders, but that's just kind of what popped in my head. But yeah, in terms of community people, just like slow burn, build that relationship. Find a way to build that relationship authentically outside of the partnership first. Like AAMI, the African American Music Institute, did not like just jump in and start like doing stuff with us. First, our executive director started taking piano lessons there, and he took piano lessons there for about 6 months. Then one of the other piano teachers had like a background in finance, and so we brought him on part-time to kind of help us with our books. And all of a sudden now there's like personal relationships between the musicians and our executive director at Community Forge. And only then did we say like, hey, we really want to mix up our open mic, and it might be cool if like we had like some like jazz performance happening in the background. And it was only then was it sort of appropriate to kind of be like, do you want to come into this organization and do this sort of thing? And so like to do authentic community work, you kind of have to like just become part of the community in like a real way, like become friends with people and like actually like build them into your life and your community. I mean, like we had like played card games, the spades tournaments and stuff. And like a lot of the founders, we each chose like a youth in the neighborhood to like try and like get a little bit closer to and build a sort of mentee mentorship relationship with. And it was through becoming like a 5-year mentor of some of these kids as they like went through their teenage years that we got really like deep into the families of the kids and families in these communities just by nature of their economic situation, they have to be tight. Like they can't just be these little nuclear units the way that people in more privileged communities can be. And so once you start getting like in with a lot of these community members, it will spread really fast from there because they are already very highly networked with each other. And when they see that you're coming at this authentically, and that you're like a part of the family, then like that goes a super, super long way. But like don't undervalue that trust too. Like that's not just like a strategy. Like that's something that like kind of has to be real. So take it slow, be authentic, and then really be cautious about what other people you're bringing in outside of your organization that could compromise some of that trust that you've built up.
Thank you, Coop. And Emily, I think you have one last question before we move on to policy.
I do. Yeah, Coop, it's great to meet you. I appreciate the Community Forge space. I've had a chance to visit a couple of times with some other members of your team, and I don't know how open you are to co-working, but it's just a different vibe, like you're saying, where you're like sanding floors at 11 at night, but also bringing that energy into the workday, is something I always really appreciate. But my question is kind of a little bit maybe as a precursor to that, to cultivating that space. Something that you discussed, that I really want to emphasize, is that you started as an LLC and then finally decided 501c3 was the right fit for you. One of the questions I get a lot from GPNP members or like prospective, like nonprofit founders, and there's a lot of nonprofits in our region. And there's a lot of different ways to make an impact in the community. And so I'm curious, like, what are some of the really critical points in those conversations with you and your partners where you were like, this is the right focus for us right now, and then this is what made us go to 501c3 status? Or if there's other folks that you work with that are like LLCs or incorporated, that still bring value to the community the way that you've designed it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like in like full disclosure, I have like a Soviet cosmonaut tattoo on my lower arm. And so I would have never, like, I was very much in that sort of like anti-capitalist mindset. But I have learned over the years that, yeah, there's a lot of different ways to make an impact in the community, and actually like not being a burden on other people's like donations and foundations is honestly the best thing. Like if you can do the work of Community Forge without being a nonprofit, then that is, I think, almost the gold standard, because then you are sustaining your operations just based off of your own economic activity. So like mad props to people who are actually able to do a lot of work as an LLC. We always started with this sort of inclination towards service. I mean, no one ever took a single dollar out of the Community Forge LLC bank account for anything. The only sort of like private endearment in the first 3 days that I could describe is like we all had our weddings there. I had my wedding in the parking lot, or ED had his wedding in the atrium, another one had their wedding on the roof, just to test it out to see like how it would work with different spaces. But so yeah, how did we kind of come to that decision? We had started a 501c3 inside of the building at the same time because we wanted to do educational stuff, and we wanted to be able to like talk to Remake Learning and Grable and stuff like that. And so once Community Forge became a nonprofit, we dissolved that other nonprofit. So nonprofit kind of life was always a part of it. But before Community Forge, we applied for an SBIR grant in order to make a small business to do some like learning stuff that nowadays is trivial with AI, but like that's like kind of what we were trying to build out in like the 2015s or so. But yeah, the decision to become a 501c3 was not made lightly. We actually, our original intention was actually to form a cooperative. We wanted all of the tenants of the building to eventually be part owners of the building, and everybody to just like have some equity in the space and to like co-run this space together. And we had a huge meeting with all of our tenants where we presented both options. We brought everybody in, we had a little community advisory committee people, we brought in stakeholders outside, and we were like, Community Forge is going to change. We're this sort of LLC. It's just like it's our private building, but we never intended it to stay this way. And Bridgeway is letting us not have it this way in the future. And so like, what should we do? Option one, co-op. And then we had some experts come in and describe the whole co-op structure, what it would mean, what it would mean for the tenants, what their responsibilities would be, what the sort of benefits, risks, challenges, all that. And then 501c3, what are some of the options as a charity that like you kind of have at your disposal? What are some of the limitations? How is this going to like, how could this slow you down in some ways, speed you up in other ways? What are some of the restrictions? And we had a real conversation. And we basically like told the tenants, like, we'll just donate this building to you guys. You guys will all just part own this building, but here's what it means to own this building, and here's what you're going to have to be able to do. And it turned out that the tenants didn't want it. Like once they sort of fully understood what it all meant. They were, I mean, a lot of the people that we didn't bring in any tenants unless we thought they were sort of on mission for what we were trying to do of equitable economic development. And what that meant is that we didn't have like Apple and Google renting space in our building, right? We had a bunch of local community people, mom and pop, small businesses, stuff like that, other nonprofits and things. And so, yeah, just like the cost and the energy and the responsibility of being a co-op didn't really make a lot of sense for folks. And so that's why we ended up going the nonprofit route. But yeah, to your point, we're super open to any sort of structure, and every single structure has pros and cons. 501c3s have pros and cons, just like normal for-profit businesses have pros and cons. Like the best thing is like if you have all three of their best qualities together, which is kind of what I feel like the original Community Forge kind of was, where it was like purely mission driven and nobody was like taking anything out of it. It was all just giving into it. And so it had that nonprofit vibe, even though it was a private business, but it had this sort of like agility and flexibility to be able to kind of like spin things up, try things, execute on things. Like it had that like capacity to be creative and also be self-sustaining, which like the LLC had. And then it was just this 12.5% equal ownership of all of the people who own the space, with like all of their actions being guided and led by the community, kind of cooperative, where it was sort of like a community cooperative. And so if that model could have like sustained 40 employees instead of one employee, then I think that actually staying the way that it was might have actually been the most impactful thing for our community. But because we wanted to rapidly scale up staff and personnel, so that way we could make this like our actual life's work. Like I left the academia in 2022, came off the board of directors to become a full-time staff member here at Community Forge. Like that was only possible because the day we got our 501c3 determination letter, Heinz was ready with like a $400,000 check to just give us to all of a sudden like hire all the people we needed and have the operational capacity. So yeah, also if anyone wants to kind of chat more about pros and cons there, happy to kind of share what, our slides and stuff and like what we were kind of thinking along those lines as well. But don't think that like to do good, you have to be a nonprofit. That like might be very common. But I think like to do good, you have to have the intention and energy to do good and like the sort of inclination to like do good. And that could be through a nonprofit or a business or whatever.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I put this in the chat. I'm also going to follow up with you on kind of fleshing that out a little bit, because one of the things that we're really trying to emphasize with our members right now, who are nonprofits, but also, university students and, from all different backgrounds, chambers of commerce, small businesses, like anybody that wants to do community good and is really struggling to find the best ways that do that, where they fit them currently, but also where they want to go. And I think like what you just shared is, I put it in the chat, like a master class on, or like something that could be like a white paper on like what considerations do you make, not only as the organization's leader, but also working in community with different leaders with different agendas and requirements, and recognizing that those can be assets versus things that, cause you to have to speak a different language when you're moving like nonprofit to government to, private entity. So I appreciate that answer. Thank you.
Extremely kind, probably an exaggeration, but I appreciate it.
Worries. And I'm going to jump into the policy updates, if that's all right, Christine. Are we good on time for that?
Take it away.
Awesome. And then Bree, perfect timing, launching the poll. All right, so I'm going to go, actually I lied, I'm not doing policy updates first. I am doing ecosystem updates, because we have a couple things that are really exciting coming up. And so let me get all of these pop-ups and taskbars out of my screen, and then we'll do the updates. All right, so first, this is a little preview of what you'll see for our folks in Westmoreland County joining us this morning. We are going to be in the Summer Sounds booklet for their concert series this summer as a sponsor, but also this is our first public announcement of our upcoming GPNP Summit beyond this call, or calls that we've had with specific partners. And our 20th anniversary summit is going to be December 4th through 6th at Nova Place. And we have a whole series of lead up events that are coming soon. I'll ask Christine or Bree to share in the chat the link to our speaker page, because our first call to action is inviting anybody and everyone who has something to share with the nonprofit sector that needs to be replicated or known or just kind of discussed with a group of really passionate, dedicated leaders in Southwest PA across nonprofit, philanthropic, government, business, corporate sectors. That's, that is what the summit is for. It is really building that kind of cross-sector relationship, but also how are we solving, micro level to macro level to global issues that are affecting us in Southwest PA. So that is going to close on April 25th. And again, this is the first call for speakers. We're getting a feel for who would be a good kind of session host or MC or moderator for some of our lead up events, as well as, maybe a full panel presentation or even keynote at the summit at the end of the year. We've got plenty of time to work that out and kind of right size things. But if you would like to speak, or if there's somebody that would be really great as an MC, moderator, speaker, presenter, keynote, panelist, even if it's just a topic at this point, the first call for speakers is really broad. And even if you don't have the full, title description fleshed out, we'd really just like to hear kind of what's top of mind for the sector right now to make sure that it's represented in some way. And we have dedicated time during the summit for that discussion. And then finally, our transformative leadership and golf cohort is going to be launching later this spring. I know Hannah's on. Hannah, if you are in this space to unmute and say a couple words, feel free. Otherwise, the bit.ly link we can add to the chat. And as a reminder, this golf cohort is meant to help leaders across sectors, not just the nonprofit sector, be more agile and responsive in their decision-making, thinking, and leadership, and see how that translates from the golf course to, the boardroom or, executive office, as well as other leadership tools and pathways as well. I was in the inaugural cohort, had a great experience. Happy to talk to anybody about it if you have questions. All right, so starting hyperlocal here, there is a vacant seat on Allegheny County Council, and this is following the resignation of Councilman David Bonarotti, sorry. And the council will appoint a replacement to serve the remainder of his term as well, per the county's charter. This is going to impact nonprofits because, as we know from the end of last year, there were a lot of decisions at the county council level, like with human services budget funding, like approving the county executive's budget overall, that really do have a huge impact on local nonprofits. And, that vote went in the favor of the human services budget right on that vote margin. So like they needed 10 votes, there were exactly 10 votes that supported that. And so just kind of thinking through what are the decisions that affect your organization that need to be made at the county level, at the city level, at the executive level is really important. And so just kind of highlighting that this is a vacant seat currently, and thinking through, how am I engaging in public forums, communicating with current council members? Are they aware of my organization and what I do, and the value that I'm providing to the community? Staying informed on, what the, who the candidates for this seat are and what their potential policy alignment is, so you can anticipate shifts and, early on build that relationship. And then also partnering with other nonprofits, like through GPNP, to talk about, what is being discussed with county council currently and what some priorities that overlap with your mission might look like. Kind of zooming straight up to the federal level, the Trump administration has initiated measures targeting higher education institutions. This is something that you've likely seen in the headlines. We broke out the policy update this morning to focus on both federal impacts on higher education, universities, as well as K-12 education. So think of these as two separate kind of discussions right now. So for institutions of higher education, there's, accreditation systems, funding that comes from the federal government. And then also you've seen a lot, I'm sure, of articles and headlines around campus activism and individual students who have been targeted based on, what they've said or demonstrations that they've shown up to and participated in. And so the relevant policy or item that I want to focus on is one of the new strategies rather than going right after, university funding or speaking directly to students is proposing changes to the accreditation process that would replace existing agencies and policies to be more aligned with the administration values, which would alter the standards for funding eligibility rather than changing who receives funding under current eligibility. So this could include things like investigations into universities, which has already been launched at Harvard, and also restrictions from the federal government imposed related to individual programs, policies, or decisions that leadership at a university makes. So there's two likely impacts on nonprofits in Southwest PA right now. I mean, one, we have a ton of universities, dozens in Southwest PA. So facing challenges maintaining accreditation, securing federal funds, and that affects not only, university partnerships with nonprofits, but also research that they can do. And so one of the things that, we talked about this morning is relationships with universities. A lot of our local universities have community-based participatory research programs that require longer-term relationship building, so they're not extractive. And that's something that is likely to decrease. Second, nonprofits collaborating with higher education institutions could experience disruptions in joint initiatives and also funding streams that have been taking place in partnership with those universities. And so one thing that we talked about a little bit last week was early or preemptive compliance. There are policy changes still in progress, and so prepare for potential shifts, but also don't preemptively comply with what you think the challenge is going to be. Have open and honest conversations with the folks that you work with at each of the universities about what they're thinking about. There's a whole conversation around, shift of language versus shift of intent in a program. There are ways to be, clever and creative in how we shape the work that we do. And so having transparent conversations proactively is really the best way to get ahead of this. K-12 level, which just affects our school systems. The administration has challenged state policies on transgender student participation in sports, threatening to withdraw federal funding from non-compliant states. Maine is the kind of loudest example of this currently in the headlines. And so while the issue of participation of transgender athletes is kind of front and center, the real issue is more so that based on a specific policy or action of a school, the federal government deciding whether or not to continue funding or pull funding opens the door for this precedent to affect a lot of other things as well. And so this is kind of the first of many policies that might be enacted this way. And so for organizations that are working directly with schools, adjusting program language in response to shifting policies might be an early conversation. Also, nonprofits serving transgender youth or providing gender affirming services to youth might face increased demand for supportive services as those services are not able to be administered at the same level through schools. And so there's a whole host of kind of shifts. We saw this regionally through 2023 and 2024 with the conversation around Planned Parenthood and recognizing that as in the 2024 election, as there were a lot of votes around I'm trying to think of the right word, reproductive care and reproductive rights on the ballot across a lot of states. Pennsylvania maintaining services in that area, while surrounding states changed level of service, directly increased demand for those services in this state. And so looking at not only what current levels of support are looking like, but also how that's likely to shift is really critical for nonprofits that are providing those services in this area specifically. Also looking at changes to immigration policies and current legal disputes or ongoing discussions related to policies, deportation and legal protections. The Supreme Court did rule in favor of Garcia, who was a Maryland resident wrongfully deported to El Salvador, and it was a 9-0 vote. And so looking at, again, we talked a little bit about this last week at the local level for the Wisconsin State Supreme Court election, but also the 2 districts in Florida that were vacant seats for the U.S. House. There's this kind of shift in public opinion and also opinion within the different levels of government that seem to be opposing a lot of the proposals from the administration at this point. And this is an example of something that was proposed as an executive order, carried out, and then there was a mistake that the Supreme Court has had to make a ruling in response. And so looking at impacts on nonprofits in Southwest PA, these have been pretty consistent since January, but increased need for legal representation and support for affected individuals, and also heightened demand for assistance in navigating complex policies, especially as they're changing daily in some cases. And so looking at advocacy, providing legal assistance, community outreach, making resources available in multiple languages across a lot of organizations is a really good way to continue providing support. Looking at the SAVE Act, so this is the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act. This is a proposal, or it proposes voter registration requirements affecting voter participation. And while it was initially proposed for U.S. citizenship and really targeting making sure that illegal immigrants couldn't participate in elections, it's also going to have the impact of anybody whose name does not match their birth certificate to their voter registration or ID, that they will not be able to participate in voting. And particularly for married women who've changed their last name, this is a huge issue. And so in any conversations that are happening around advocacy, voter engagement, community engagement around, civic duty, this is a huge topic of education. So the biggest things are voter education, informing communities about the new requirements, and helping those assisting them in obtaining necessary documentation. One of the challenges around this conversation is the price point for updating legal documents like IDs, passports, marriage licenses, making sure that everything is in compliance. Second is staying up to date on the legislative progress. So there was a bill that was introduced and not passed that would have created a kind of amendment to make sure that this law or bill did not affect married women because of the name change, and it was not passed. And so looking at not only like this policy, the act itself and that language, but also kind of related conversations that are happening is really important. And then the biggest thing is collaborating with other organizations, especially in upcoming elections, around making sure that people aren't surprised at the polls if they're told that they can't vote, making sure that they're prepared and showing up ready to participate with the proper documentation, on that day, or mailing their vote in advance. Looking at lobbying, not within the nonprofit sector, but some of the other lobbying efforts that are likely to impact particularly what nonprofits that are focusing on energy, green energy, climate, and environment are looking at. The American Public Gas Association, Philadelphia Gas Works are lobbying the Trump administration to review and potentially likely limit federal climate funding aimed at reducing carbon emissions. So looking at a lot of the protections for, safe water, safe air, land use that are really impacting the environment, and the regulations that have made those actions possible are facing increased scrutiny. So looking at reduction for funding for clean energy initiatives, and limiting funding and expansion of energy efficiency and efforts that would reduce utility costs for low-income households by switching to wind or solar. These are all related policy and economic impacts. And so looking at nonprofit leaders and what we can do, engaging with policymakers and emphasizing the importance of funding around climate protection, but also the impacts of policies currently, and then also partnering with other organizations to strengthen the collective voice of clean energy support. A lot of the recommendations that you're seeing here reflect an awareness that no one organization is going to be able to change these things on their own. At this point, we have to have board members, partner organizations, community partners and volunteers all engaging in advocacy. And no one organization or person can possibly shoulder all of the things that effective advocacy is going to require from here on out. So, building relationships with elected officials, leaving behind policy analyses and one-pagers that have the impact clearly stated, updates to that information based on the most relevant language or legislation that has been passed or is being discussed. And so, one example of this that affects specifically the arts community and education through public libraries is a decision recently to repurpose the funds that were cut from the National Endowment for the Humanities and National Endowment for the Arts to construct, or it's being proposed, to construct the Garden of American Heroes initiative in support of the Trump administration for the 250th anniversary celebration of the Declaration of Independence. Looking at how this funding is being repurposed from museums, historical societies, arts, libraries, is really kind of hitting the nail on the head in terms of organizations really need to be telling the stories about this impact and what it's going to mean for communities now. And so looking at some of the specific resources I wanted to highlight this morning, and I'll ask Christine or Bree to put them in the chat. The National Council of Nonprofits has a lot of resources at a national level, and we're kind of filtering to the Pennsylvania Association of Nonprofit Organizations and our policy updates to make sure that the same conversations can be had locally using these resources. And so the National Council has highlighted, everyday advocacy efforts, things that you can do that take, 5 to 20 minutes, sending an email to an elected official at the county, city, state level, introducing you, your organization, the impact of the services that you provide, and some of the policies that are currently being discussed at the federal, state, or local level that are going to impact your ability to do your work effectively. Looking at the trends and policy issues, this is a really good overview of kind of sector-wide trends that are specific to the nonprofit sector. One of the things that we really aim to do during these Monday calls is put trends that are emphasizing, government or corporate actions and how they're going to impact the nonprofit sector. The National Council does a really good job of kind of doing that in the opposite direction, where, things that are directly impacting the nonprofit sector are going to impact, members of the community. And so are going to impact businesses, are going to impact, spending dollars that are affecting small businesses, especially related to local tariff policies. And then finally, executive orders and looking at what the impact of nonprofits or impact on nonprofits is. PANO is working on a study to share the economic impact of nonprofits in Pennsylvania, and our policy committee, or PANO's policy committee that I'm a part of, has been having that conversation for 2 years and kind of building out this study and making sure that it reflects, the number of people employed by the nonprofit sector, but also board members, people served, the actual dollars and cents that are possible because of contracts through government to nonprofits and the work that we do every day. And so I just wanted to highlight those. I know we're well over time here this morning, but I appreciate the conversation with Coop. Thank you for, any questions and comments folks provided. I'm looking through the chat to make sure I didn't miss anything, but I'll turn it back over to Christine to close us out.
All right, thank you so much, Emily. Yes, thanks everyone for hanging on with us. As I mentioned in the chat, you can catch the recording on the member portal or on our YouTube channel later this week. And as Emily mentioned, as Emily mentioned, next week we'll have Mark Lancia from 412 Ability Tech. We are very excited to hear more about their ecosystem and how they're bringing resources and advocacy to communities with disabilities. So we're very excited to hear more about that. And we look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a great week, everyone.